Hello and welcome. This is season 3 of WowPodcast, where everyone needs adventure. This season, we're talking to the most determined, persistent, and courageous writers of our time. Thank you for tuning in to WowPodcast. Today, I have in front of me Mr. Rick Schaeffer. He's the author of Game of My Life, 100 Things Arkansas Fans Should Know and Do Before They Die, and the University of Arkansas Vault. Mr. Rick, how are you doing?
Doing great, Darshan. If I was everything that you just said the author should be, I would have finished the 4th book that I'm working on by now, but I haven't.
So what's the 4th book that you're working on?
The 4th book I'm working on is a biography of Frank Broyles, who was the longtime head football coach and athletic director at the University of Arkansas. Spent over 50 years of his life there. You could argue that he is the most influential man that's ever lived in the state of Arkansas. You could make that argument because of what he did to bring the state together. And I'm about halfway through with it, but I've been working on it for 4 years because I have these other jobs that kind of interfere with being able to finish. But I will finish, and I think that'll be, in my opinion, a more important work than the 3 that I've done.
Okay, I'm glad you said something about working on your book for 4 years. How long did it take you to work on The Game of My Life?
Few months. I was approached by The Game of My Life was a series that were done at a lot of colleges, and I had left the athletic department. I worked there for 24 years, where Coach Broyles was the athletic director. And when I left, and they were looking for someone, the publisher was looking for somebody who had a knowledge of Razorback history, so they contacted me. And when you're working for a publisher, they put deadlines on you. And so I'm going to say that book took me probably 4 to 5 months to complete.
Okay, so most people who listen to this broadcast want to know what are your techniques on writing your any particular book?
Well, that book was strictly it was several chapters by several Razorback football players and talking about a game that was a particularly significant game in Razorback history that they played a leading part in. And so it was recalling the lead up to the game itself, and the post game, with some a little bit of biography in each one of those. And so the technique was obviously to interview those who participated. And that was the fun part because I knew most of them through my years of working at the athletic department. There were a few there were 2 or 3 that played after I had left that the games were of significance, but they were still very gracious to do the interview with me. So the technique is first you gather the information, and then remembering most of the details of the game helped me too. And then you just start writing.
So which sport do you love the most?
Baseball, but I've never written a baseball book, but I've read a whole lot of them.
So what are the things that you know about baseball? What is your expertise about baseball?
Well, I don't know if I love the game. I remember the first time I went to a Major League game, I was 9 years old. And when you're that age, you're very impressionable, and you walk into a Major League ballpark, and it's overwhelming, and the grass is the greenest grass you've ever seen, and the smells are the greatest smells you've ever seen. And you see these guys out there doing things that there's no way in the world you could do. And so I think that's why I got addicted. And then you study the nuances of the game. It's also a daily game. And I think that when you're talking about persistence, the dailiness of baseball teaches you persistence. Because there may be a few off days, but in the major leagues, you play 162 games in 180 days. And that means you're out there all the time. Mm-hmm. And that's what I love about it, is every day you've got a chance to do something good. And when you fail, you get a chance to do something good the next day.
Gotcha. So what's a fun fact or tip that you wrote about in 100 Things Arkansas Fans Should Know and Do Before They Die, if you can remember?
Yeah, let's see, that one was about 3 years ago, I think I finished it. So a tip from that one, well, the first thing is, you start with 1, 2, and 3, and Hugo, the 3 B's are Bezdek, Barnhill, and Broyles. Hugo Bezdek was the football coach in 1909 when the University of Arkansas was known as the Cardinals, and but Razorbacks were kind of the subliminal symbol for Arkansas. Even back in the Civil War, their soldiers and their units were called Razorbacks. And so after Arkansas beat LSU in the game in 1909, and back then you traveled by train, when Hugo Bezdek and the team got back to Fayetteville, there was a great crowd to greet them. He said, "Our team played like a wild band of Razorback hogs." And it caught on, and eventually led to the change of the nickname at Arkansas from Cardinals to Razorbacks. So that was big. And Hugo Bezdek also, I believe, is the only man that's ever coached a major college football team, coached an NFL team, and managed a Major League Baseball team. So, which all came after he was at Arkansas.
Okay.
So that's one B. John Barnhill was the athletic, came in 1946 as head coach and athletic director, and he's the one that really built the wall around Arkansas. The program wasn't very good. He said, we got to get the best players in Arkansas to come to Arkansas because they've been leaving the state. And he kind of started building that state, that foundation. Then he was the athletic director that hired Frank Broyles as football coach. And when you look back in the 1960s, Arkansas had won one national championship and came within a game of 3 others. So it was a dominant program in the 60s with Broyles as football coach.
Gotcha. So, Mr. Rick, do you find yourself being as disciplined and determined as most of the athletes that you cover, as far as like your work ethic or things that you want to do?
I don't know that I've ever tried to compare myself to that. I think that the military and athletics probably teach disciplined habits better than anything in America today. And America's got a lot of disciplined people. You can like or dislike the current president, but he is one of the most disciplined workers that you will ever see. And I don't know if he ever sleeps. And you see business leaders like that. When I think of what it takes for a football player, for instance, the games themselves last about 3 hours.
Mm-hmm.
You play 12 college football games in a year. That's 36 hours. At a bowl game, that's 39 hours. Throw in an extra hour for the heck of it, that's 40 hours. Those guys work basically 50 weeks. They may take a couple weeks off. 50 weeks a year for 40 hours of playing. I'm not sure there's any other place in America that takes that type of discipline to be prepared for what you're doing.
Right.
So to say, do I have that same type of discipline? I'm not sure there are many humans that have that kind of discipline.
So, who's your favorite athlete?
Well, there are several that I admire. I would say if you're asking my favorite of all time, it'd be Cal Ripken. Cal Ripken Jr. was a longtime shortstop, then played third base some for the Baltimore Orioles, and because the Orioles were my favorite baseball team. But he not only was a Hall of Famer because he got over 3,000 hits, he had over 400 home runs, and those were Hall of Fame numbers for an infielder. But what he's famous for is how many consecutive games he played.
Right.
He broke a record that was supposed to be unbreakable, and he broke it by over 500 games. He played in 2,632 consecutive games, which when you look at baseball and the grind that it is, that is the equivalent of 16 full seasons without missing a game. Nobody else has come close.
So, you know a lot about sports, and the people who are either going to watch this or listening to it via the audio podcast, can you explain to them the other things that you do besides write books?
Well, that's a very small part of what I do. For 24 years, I did public relations and communications for the University of Arkansas Athletic Department. When I left there, I've had various other things I've done, but for right now, I'm in my 13th year as communications director for the Springdale School District, and which is kind of like what I did in athletics, except it's for an entire district. And I don't get into athletics that much. It's telling the stories of great things going on in our classrooms and in our district. And it's a really fun job. I like it a lot. Springdale's the second largest district in Arkansas. We have about 23,000 students, about 2,300 employees. So you can add those up and say there are a lot of good stories to be told there. And then the person I work for, Dr. Jim Rollins, our superintendent, has been kind enough to allow me to stay in the other world too, the sports world. And so at 4 o'clock, I close my door. And for 3 hours, talk on statewide radio, mostly about the Razorbacks, but really all areas of sports.
Right. Are you still running your nonprofit organization?
My wife is executive director of Champions for Kids, and so she's still involved with that, and I do help a little bit, but I'd say she does 98% of the work.
And do you guys have anything coming up soon?
No events or anything. She's working on some projects right now that we think are going to be significant in helping kids all over the United States, and that's what we want to do.
Gotcha. So we're going to get just a little bit personal. I'm going to tell everyone kind of how I know you. So this interview to me is very special because when I moved up here, I believe I was 19 at the time, but I didn't meet Mr. Rick until I was maybe about 21, 22. And there was a young lady by the name of Priscilla that I was going to the community college with. She told me about Mr. Rick and his wife Adelaide, and she told me that they went to, I think at the time, was it Pinnacle Hills Church?
Yeah, Cross Church, and it was at Pinnacle Hills, and we still go to Cross Church.
Okay,
yeah.
So Mr. Rick is very close to me because we're brothers in Christ. We go to the same church. And part of the reason I have this podcast and I do some of the things I do was because at the time, I'm not going to say your age, but at the time, he was an older gentleman than myself, and I was like, if he can do all these different things, so can I. So I fashioned and modeled my life and my beliefs after Mr. Rick because I loved his union with his wife. He was just always dedicated to work, and I just fashioned myself after you. So to interview you is an honor and a pleasure, and I really appreciate you for your time.
I'm glad you said that at the end because I'm not sure I could have spoken much after that. That was very nice. Thank you. And it's great to see you in this position. When you say you're young, you still look pretty darn young, Darshan.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And I'm still just as much older than you than I was then. So.
Right. So I want to thank you guys for listening to Wow Podcast. By all means, go to WowPodcast.shop. That's WOWPODCAST.shop. Check out our podcast. We are on every Wednesday. This is season 3, where everyone needs adventure. Thank you for tuning in.